So I call on all those present to put politics aside for a moment and to support this chair and her panel in the pursuit of truth and justice. And I commend the statement to the House.
Shadow Home Secretary.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Let us remember victims are at the heart of this. Young girls, some only 10 years old, were groomed and gang raped by men of mainly Pakistani origin. Girls like Jane, just 12 years old when she was raped by an illegal immigrant. When she was found by police, instead of arresting the rapist, they arrested Jane. Or Anna, only 15 years old, who repeatedly told social workers that she had been gang raped, but instead of helping her, they allowed her to marry her main abuser in an Islamic ceremony, attended by the very social worker who should have protected her. Last week, sentencing remarks were published from several of these terrible cases. I warn the House, some of these are extremely graphic. One perpetrator, Mohammed Karar, raped a 12-year-old girl, and when she tried to fight back, he hit her with a baseball bat and then inserted the handle into her vagina. He also injected her with heroin and forced her to take crack cocaine. Another man, Arshid Hussain, viciously beat a young girl, stubbed out a cigarette on her chest, tied her up, and she was then repeatedly raped by numerous different Asian men. The same man, Arshid Hussain, also called a victim who had been raped and abused since the age of just 7, quotes, white trash. He said that Asian girls would not do what he was forcing her to do. There was an explicit racial element to his crime. He was raping his victim because she was white. The identity of the majority of the perpetrators is something that should not be hidden. A 2020 study by academics at the universities of Southampton and Reading reviewed 498 grooming gang convictions. They found that 83% of the perpetrators were of Muslim background, mainly, specifically, of Pakistani heritage. The Casey report and the Telford report made similar observations. The fact is, these crimes were deliberately covered up by those in authority who were more interested in so-called community relations and in avoiding being called racist than they were in protecting young girls. I spoke to a retired police officer who was told by a serving chief superintendent to stop investigating abuse by Pakistani origin taxi drivers in Bradford because the local police did not want to offend Bradford's Muslim community. And I've sent the name of that officer to the police for investigation. A former Labour MP, Simon Danchuk, was even told by the then chair of the Parliamentary Labour Party to stop asking questions to avoid antagonising the Muslim community in his town. Yet when the need for a national inquiry into this was raised in January, the Prime Minister disgracefully smeared those calling for an inquiry as, quotes, far right. What the Prime Minister claimed was a far right bandwagon in January had become government policy by June. So will the Home Secretary please apologise on behalf of the Prime Minister for what he said last January? The truth is, this should not have taken several months and the threat of a vote in Parliament to agree to this inquiry in the first place, and it should not have taken another 6 months to appoint a chair. That is what the survivors and their families told me yesterday. One of the most disturbing elements of this scandal is the deliberate cover-up of these crimes, as I have said. So can the Home Secretary assure the House that those in authority who covered up these crimes will be prosecuted for the offence of misconduct in public office, and will she ensure the inquiry refers such cases to the police for investigation? Can she confirm the inquiry will formally start in March of 2026 and that the final report will be published publicly 3 years later in March 2029? We have not yet seen the terms of reference. Survivors and their families, who I met yesterday, are concerned the scope of this inquiry may be too broad. So will the Home Secretary confirm it will focus specifically on localised, group-based grooming gangs, and it will analyse the ethnicity and religious background of the perpetrators? She mentions local inquiries sitting underneath the national inquiry. Can she also specifically confirm that those local inquiries will be completely independent of those bodies they are investigating, particularly independent of local councils and independent of local police forces. They can't be allowed to investigate themselves. Will the Home Secretary also confirm that parents of survivors and victims will be able to serve on the panel as well? I spoke yesterday to two parents of survivors who felt they'd been excluded from the previous panels. Madam Deputy Speaker, for many survivors and victims, the truth has been hidden for far too long. These crimes were covered up because those in authority were more concerned about so-called community relations and avoiding being called racist than they were about protecting young children. That was an abject moral failure. The truth, at last, must come out.
Secretary.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and can I thank the Shadow Secretary of State for his remarks. Let me just say, as he was reading out excerpts from some of the court transcripts that have been made public, I, like other members in the House, have read some of those transcripts, and they do make for truly horrifying reading, and they're a reminder, the starkest reminder of all perhaps, for everyone in this House and beyond, that it is absolutely essential that we all collectively do right by the victims who have had such unimaginable horrors inflicted upon them, and I hope that that is the spirit in which we will all be able to engage across this House as the inquiry gets up and running and continues its work. I also want to say, Madam Deputy Speaker, I think this is a moment to elevate, now that we have a chair and panel in place, to elevate this discussion beyond our usual trade-offs of party politics across this dispatch box. The Shadow Secretary of State has a critique of the government. I will robustly defend the government of which I am a part. We have always been focused on the outcome of justice and truth for victims, less so the process itself, but it was this government that asked Baroness Casey to do her national audit. She followed the evidence and recommended this national inquiry, and that is what we are doing, and that is what we have supported. But now that we have a chair and a panel, I just think that this is a moment, if we're going to do right by the victims, who are a diverse cohort of people who will have different views and who will all feel, regardless of where they stand on this inquiry itself, some degree of anxiety about what will happen next, and will need some reassurance that we can rise above our usual political discourse and unite in support for the chair and panel as they do this important work. Let me say, for most of his detailed questions, the answer is a straightforward yes. So on scope, let me just reassure him, there is no dilution of the scope, and it is very clearly focused on exactly the problem that was named by Baroness Casey in her national audit. To the extent that the inquiry finds evidence of any potential misconduct in public office or other breaches of the law, of course, they are working very closely with our partners in law enforcement. The whole point for having this inquiry is to make sure that there are actions that result from these investigations and that people are properly held to account, including by facing the full force of the law. I'm sure that once the inquiry reports, they will have other things to say, potentially even about strengthening the law as well. So I think it's important we let the inquiry do their work, but they are not going to be held back from making any findings that lead to further investigations and accountability through the legal system. Let me also confirm to him on timings. March, the draft terms of reference will be confirmed no later than March. It could come a little earlier potentially, but up to three months for the draft terms of reference, and then up to 3 years for the inquiry to conclude, so no later than 2020, not March 29, with the report as well. And that is the timetable that the chair and the panel members have signed up for. On the local investigations, of course, it's right, they won't be investigating themselves. The work of the local investigation will be under the auspices of the chair and her panel, and they will be making sure that those investigations are held by them to the standard that they will set and follow themselves, and they will also decide which other areas they wish to be included in these local investigations. And I'm sure members will want to make representations to them, but no area anywhere in England or Wales will be able to resist having a local investigation under the auspices of this inquiry, which of course has all of the statutory powers that you would expect such an inquiry to have. I think, Madam Deputy Speaker, I've dealt with all of the issues that the Shadow Secretary of State has raised, but I do look forward to, I hope, a more constructive dialogue between us as the inquiry gets underway.